Hey everybody, how's it going? Good to see all of you. Hope you're doing well and everything's groovy. I wanted to talk to you a little bit in this video about the midterm number 2, the second midterm, and that's on 12 Angry Men, the movie 12 Angry Men, the 1997 version of it. So there is another midterm, and you all did a great job on the Breakfast Club midterm, which was the first midterm. This is the second midterm, and it deals with 12 Angry Men. So I was thinking we could do what we did last time and kind of go over the prompt. So let's take a look at the actual prompt that has been posted. And take a look at it. All right. Let's see if I can find it here. There we go. All right, here is our prompt. Yay. This is the prompt that is in iLearn for the second midterm, which is about the movie 12 Angry Men, specifically the 1997 version. And as usual, you're going to be submitting this in iLearn. Okay, for this assignment, you will be turning into a 4 to 7 page essay analyzing the communication in 12 Angry Men. You'll be using the concepts presented in your textbook by Beebe and Masterson and discussion and lecture material as a lens to view the communication. Please quote the authors of your textbook liberally, at least 4 times per section of the paper for section A, and at least once for section B, decision-making in the body. Assume your reader is not familiar with our textbook, so you'll need to define your terms when you use vocabulary specific to our academic discipline. For example, consensus, accommodation, conflict style, etc. So yeah, so you can use APA or MLA style for these source citations, and you're going to be quoting the book. And remember when you quote the book to put quote marks around your quotes. So sometimes it's tempting to like underline quotes or put them in bold or italics. But if it's a quote from the book, usually it's just good to put quote marks around it. That way you can avoid accusations of plagiarism. And then also, like when you do that, it really gives credit to the person that came up with the idea. So quotation marks are good. It says always use quotation marks in source citations. APA, MLA, and Chicago are acceptable, for example. Actually, also, and I might have mentioned this last time, but just to reiterate the point, APA stands for the American Psychological Association. And Diana Hacker made a pretty good uh, explanation of how to use APA. And I made a PDF of Diana Hacker's explanation that can be featured or found in iLearn. So check out that when you're putting things together. And you can read that over if you want to as some guidance for you. I know some of my students have mentioned liking Purdue OWL also as a website to find information about different styles. If you want to use MLA or A Chicago, that's fine as well too, or even Beruvian if you want. So it's totally up to you what you want to use. But yeah, have fun with that. And then when you use terms from the textbook, assume the reader is not familiar with these terms so that you will be forced to define the terms for the reader by quoting your textbook. So even though I'm reading these papers, assume that the person reading it is not familiar with the terms, so you need to define them. And that's a great way to get your quotes in. And then please use specific examples to back up your claims about 12 Angry Men. Specific examples recall in detail specific incidents that took place in the film. So, for example, when everyone was saying that the knife was such a specific knife, it would be really hard to get a knife like it. And then the architect pulls out that exact same type of knife from his coat pocket. That's an example that's specific. So it has like specificity to it, as opposed to like a generic example where you just say something like the architect really was smart or something, that didn't have that sort of specificity about what he did that was smart, for example. And then says here, this should be a fun, thought-provoking, and pragmatic assignment for you to complete. You will learn from this assignment can be applied to groups you are part of throughout your life. Please submit your papers via iLearn as a PDF or MS Word file, no Google Docs. On the topic of new Google Docs, I think we might have mentioned this before, but just to reiterate the point, with Google Docs, basically there's nothing wrong with using Google Docs as a way to create your papers. It's just that you don't want to submit them as Google Docs. So what you'll do is just take the Google Doc and then convert it to a PDF is the easiest thing to do. And that's super easy to do. Basically, you just click print and then it'll create a PDF usually. But if that doesn't happen, then you can always just click print, and then when it goes to the printer, instead of choosing a printer, you would choose a PDF, or you can save it as a PDF. There's different ways to do it. I actually put a YouTube video on how to do that in our course, but there's a lot of YouTube videos about how to convert a Google Doc to a PDF. But a lot of students like Google Docs. That's a pretty good software package for writing papers. But it's not a good way to submit papers for this class anyway. There's just too many issues. And it brings up some problems in terms of how I grade them and whatnot. So instead, what we do is you just convert your Google Doc to a PDF, and it's pretty fairly easy way to do it. And you can also write your papers in MS Word if you want, if you have Microsoft Word, or you can, some people use, for example, Apple has a program called Pages. And again, you can convert it very easily to a PDF by just clicking print and then choosing, instead of choosing a printer, choose save PDF, and you can make a PDF that way. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, the IT staff can help you too at San Francisco State. If you give them a call, they'll walk you through the process as well. And there's a bunch of YouTube videos about that. Okay. So source citations, Chicago style, MLA, we talked about all that. Paper should be in 12 point, unless your paper is running too long, in which you can use 10-point font. And that's totally acceptable to use 10-point font. In fact, you can even use 11-point font if you want, but play with that. You can also use different fonts. Some fonts make the paper longer, some fonts make the paper shorter. So for example, if your paper is running short, if you use a 12-point font and then use Helvetica as your font, the paper will be longer. If you use like Times New Roman and 10-point, it gets smaller. So it kind of works that way. You can also pick what size your margins are going to be. 1 is kind of the standard, but you can use 1.5 inch again if your papers are running too short and you want to make it longer. Double-sided. And don't forget a reference page. Pages should be numbered, which is pretty easy to do. And yeah. And then I've asked you to put some headers for each of the sections. So introduction, conflict, decision-making, racism, and conclusion. So just kind of basically highlighting those sections, pretty easy to do. Please include a reference page. Works cited as page at the end. This will not count as one of your numbered pages, unless your paper is running low, and then you can actually include it if you want. I don't think you'll have trouble reaching 4 pages, actually. Please note that in the section below, page numbers are listed items for your textbook. The first page number is the 10th edition, and the second page number is the 11th edition. I know some of you have the 10th edition, and some of you have the 11th edition of the textbook. Okay, let's go into actually what goes into the body of it. First off, starting with conflict, every group has some conflict, even if it is never stated or recognized by the members. And like we talked about in our conflict lecture, a lot of times there is conflict, it's just not stated outwardly. So not every conflict is like a yelling match or fist fights or anything like that. And that is a type of conflict, but that's not the only conflict that exists out there. Choose at least 4 characters in 12 Angry Men and identify at least one conflict style they adopted at some point during the film. And usually it's kind of easier sometimes to make each one of these a paragraph. That's kind of a nice way to divide it up, but I'd recommend that anyway. Yeah, any 4 characters. You can choose more than that, but 4 is plenty. There's 12, there's more than 12 actually, because there's the judge and the bailiff and the defendant, in other words, but choose at least 4 characters in there. Any 4 is pretty much good, although most people pick jury members. And then please see Beebe and Masterson for explanations of the conflict styles. And those are collaborative, avoidance, competitive, accommodation, and compromise. So that's not to be confused with conflict types, which are ego and pseudo conflict and simple conflict. So the question here of this midterm is about conflict styles, which is the collaboration, avoidance, competitive, accommodation, and compromise, and not types of conflict, ego and whatnot. Those types of conflict are interesting, and we definitely talk about them in the class and whatnot, but they're not actually the subject of this midterm. Some students like to point out things about ego conflict and whatnot. If you'd like to, you can, but it's not really part of the requirements anyway for the assignment. So when I'm grading it, I'm mostly looking for conflict styles. But yeah, sometimes people have to bring up the type of conflict in order to discuss the style. So if you do, you do, but the focus again is on conflict styles, which are collaborative, avoidance, competitive, accommodation, compromise, etc. And you can read about those in your textbook. And also I have a lecture about the different conflict styles that you can look over. And there's also a lecture about 12 Angry Men that I have as well. All those things are on video and you can see them and click them in iLearn. It says here, please use specific and detailed examples from the film to back up your claims about the character. And we talked earlier about what a specific example is versus something that's very generic. Specific examples recall in detail specific incidents that took place in the film. Please quote the authors of your textbook liberally. When you use terms from your textbooks, for example, avoidance, assume the reader is not familiar with these terms so that you will be forced to define the terms for the reader by quoting the textbook, like we talked about earlier. Please identify at least one conflict style that is present for each of the 4 characters and choose one specific and detailed example of that being used in stated or unstated conflict in the group, 12 Angry Men. And you can use a conflict style more than once if you please. So for example, if there's somebody that takes on the avoidance style and then you have another character that takes on the avoidance style, that's totally acceptable. And yeah, and then make sure that you quote the book. That's always a good thing to do. And that it helps you with the definitions anyway. And it also fulfills your requirement for citations and quotations and whatnot. So all those things can be done while you're doing all this analysis. Yeah, just have fun with that. I mean, there's a lot of conflicts in this movie for sure. Some of them are really, intense and obvious, conflicts, and they're practically border on violence, and sometimes something that, some stern words and whatnot. And then there's these real subtle conflicts, and those subtle ones are fine as well. Not every conflict is like that competitive style. So you can kind of see the different styles people take on and find little examples in the textbook to recall upon. So that's the conflict section. And then after the conflict section, we will have a section on decision making. Decision making is how the group actually makes decisions in this particular film. And it says, how did the group make decisions in 12 Angry Men? Please see Beebe and Masterson for explanations of various decision-making methods. And the ones that are listed here are majority rules, consensus, random choice, decision by minority, decision by expert in the group, etc. So you're going to be choosing one of those to analyze a decision. Please use a specific and detailed examples to back up your claims about the group. Specific examples recall in detail specific incidents that took place in your group. Please quote the authors of your textbook liberally. When you use terms from your textbook, example, random choice, you assume the reader is not familiar with these terms so that you will be forced to define the terms for the reader of your textbook. So that's kind of the same as before. So lots of quotes get there. In there, you can get your quotes in that way, and you can get your source citations in that way. Please identify at least one decision-making method present in your group and one specific and detailed example of that decision-making method being used. So yeah, so there's lots and lots of decisions that the group makes throughout this. The big decision, obviously, they make is whether or not the boy is guilty or innocent. So there's that, and you can definitely choose that one if you want to. And you can look at how basically they make that decision. Is it consensus or is it something else? Is it majority rules, for example? But then they make lots of little decisions throughout the film as well. So they decide how they're going to decide, basically. A lot of the decisions are about how they're going to make this kind of bigger decision. Like even little things like deciding to wait until somebody comes out of the bathroom is a decision. If somebody's in the bathroom and there's kind of the group starts talking about the topic without them being there, and then someone suggests that they wait till someone gets out of the bathroom. That little decision, even though it's not talked about, is a decision. It can be nonverbals, or it can be just silence. That is how that decision is made, for like a majority rule type situation, perhaps you could argue. And then decision by minority is a method that's in there. You can actually see that play itself out. So all the different styles actually of decision making are actually kind of present at points throughout the film, and you can see that. And maybe the hardest part of this will be just choosing that one decision, but you can choose more than one if you want, but you have to talk about at least one, and I don't know how much space you're going to have. But yeah, take a look at all the little decisions, take a look at the big decisions and everything in between as you're looking at this group and how they actually make their decisions. And then for this, make sure that you focus in on these ones like majority rules, consensus, random choice, decision by minority, decision by expert in the group. Those are the ones I want you to choose from the decision-making methods that are listed in your textbook, and you can read about them in the textbook and become familiar. But that's what of all the different things the book says about decision-making, that's what I'd like us to focus in on. There's also a lecture, by the way, about these different types of decision-making that you can find in iLearn as well. I made a video about it, and you can take a look at that too. But if you want, you can just read about it in the textbook. Okay, so moving on, the next thing is racism. Yeah, so there is, I don't know that the movie itself is necessarily racist. It's kind of like with The Breakfast Club. There was some discussion about whether or not the movie itself was sexist, and some people made some pretty good arguments for how the movie itself was sexist, which wasn't surprising. But yeah, the movie itself, I'm not sure if it's racist, but it does definitely have racist characters that do kind of racist things. And then some people like the word bigoted better than racist, because racist sort of has some implications about power, and the bigoted kind of captures it better. But either way, those terms are sort of interchangeable for our purposes anyway. But yeah, examples of racism in the film, lots of them, that come up in the criminal justice system. And there's some really obvious examples, and then there's some subtle examples as well. But, choose whichever example you want is fine. Says here, please recall using a specific example, one instance of racism found in the film, wherein a character or characters says or does something that is bigoted or racist. Please provide at least one word-for-word quotation from the film. Okay, so actually like something they said. Unless it's something like nonverbal, I guess. But yeah, try to find something they actually said that could be considered or interpreted as racist. Specific examples recall in detail specific incidents that took place in 12 Angry Men. And it could be somebody doing something racist or just describing something that's racist. Either way. In addition to describing the instance, please explain why you consider it an example of bigotry or racism. If you'd rather talk about ageism, that would be fine as well. So there's a lot of stuff in here where like people are discriminated against sort of, or thought of in a certain way because of their age, whether that be young or old. So if you'd like to talk about ageism instead, that would be totally acceptable as well. So you could cover that instead if you'd like to do that instead of racism. So we give you the option. You might have remembered that when we did about The Breakfast Club, we said you could either talk about sexism or homophobia. Here you get an option as well. You can talk about racism, certainly, but it would also be acceptable to talk about other things like, I don't know, you might talk about, ageism, like discriminating against old people or young people, that type of thing. It says here the directions would be the same, but rather than talking about racism, you'll talk about ageism. And then there's a conclusion, summarize the paper. So yeah, so I've had fun writing this paper. Should be a pretty fun assignment. A lot of students have enjoyed it. Email me if you have any questions about that. I'm always happy to talk about this assignment or this particular midterm number 2. And yeah, just have fun with it. I think the biggest thing that people forget when they're doing these types of assignments is they forget to quote their textbook. And if they do quote the textbook, sometimes they forget the quote mark. So that's something big that you can do as you're writing this paper, that, just making sure that you have that in place, and, the reference page and everything. Probably you can use a lot of the similar stuff from your reference page from the Breakfast Club one, because it's kind of coming from that same book. But yeah, have fun writing it, and, just kind of rewatch the film a few times, I guess, is a recommendation, or maybe have the film going while you're putting together your presentation, excuse me, your paper, would be very helpful. And you can just kind of watch different sections of it, and just kind of work through it a little bit every day, and it won't be so overwhelming. A lot of the minimum requirements are there in place so that you can be able to do the assignment, and have it fit within the space constraints, and not have it become too big or too small, whatever. I'm pretty flexible with the length. As you can see, you can sort of play games with the font and size, and the font you choose as well. So that's nice. And the margins and everything, you can play with that, and then convert it to a PDF and submit it that way. If you have any trouble submitting your paper, the IT staff is always happy to help. So I have their phone number in our iLearn class, and so you can go and give them a call, and they'll try to help you out with everything that you might need regarding that. But yeah, it should be a lot of fun writing about it. It's an interesting and very relevant movie at this point. Yeah, and if you have anything else you want to say, like criticisms of the film, or you want to throw in other things that you want to get off your chest about the whole thing, feel free to do so as well. And you can veer into other areas. Just make sure that you actually do cover the required things on the prompt, because the grading is always based on that as well. So, make sure that you focus in on the conflict styles and the decision making, and the racism, or ageism, and get all the things. And what I like to recommend to students that they do is that they write their paper and then go back and bring out the prompt again, kind of like going through your grocery list after you get done doing your groceries shopping, and you go back through the list and you're like, oh wow, I forgot to get Campbell's chicken noodle soup, darn it, okay, better go get it. Here again, you can kind of go through the prompt again and see if everything that's on the prompt is actually covered by you, and that you actually were able to hit all the points that the teachers asked you to do. That's always a nice thing to double check on. And yeah, it should be a fun paper to write. A lot of students really like the movie, so can kick back if you haven't got a chance to really watch the movie all the way through, or maybe you just saw it in little bits and it didn't all come together. Maybe on a Friday night, kick back and just throw the movie on again, and that'll help you really familiarize yourself with everything that we're trying to do anyway here with this film. And there's a lot of relevant issues here. I definitely think it has some implications for Black Lives Matter and things like that. And it also deals with how much time people are willing to put in to make a decision about someone's life. It deals with some pretty big issues that I think are pretty relevant. So I was pretty excited about this movie. I actually have been watching this movie and different versions of it, the black and white version as well, since back when I was in school, and our teachers showed it to us. And so ever since then, it's been something that, all these years, and it's the actual original movie was from the 50s. So it goes way, way back, way before my time now, but it seems to still be relevant in this day and age, with everything that's going on right now. So I hope you enjoy it. And then just, always feel free to email me if you have questions or things come up as you work on your midterm. And regarding late midterms, a lot of people ask me, can I submit my midterm late? And the answer is yes, we do accept late work. I don't necessarily encourage you to turn your work in late, but I always like to emphasize to people that we do accept late work. And the reason I like to emphasize that is because, even though you might plan to do your assignments on time, sometimes life happens and it's hard to get every assignment done. And so it's nice to just know that that's your option, that you do have the option to turn things in late, and that the grade does go down, but it's better to turn it in late than never at all. And I hope that you won't have to turn your assignment in late. But if you do, just know that I still want to read it and I still want to receive it. And if it's late, it gets marked down, but it's still accepted. Some teachers will give you a 0 if it's late, but actually I'll just accept it if it's late and mark it down a little bit. And yeah, that's about it. But yeah, call me, or I would say call me, email me if you have questions, and enjoy 12 Angry Men, enjoy the midterm, writing it and everything. And if you have any questions about the prompt or anything, let me know. And otherwise, have an amazing second midterm. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching the video, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys soon. Take care.